The last thing my mother said before the black SUV pulled up to the house was that I had wasted every opportunity our family had ever given me. She said it loud enough for 43 people to hear. I did not argue. I picked up my glass of iced tea, set it down on the white linen tablecloth, and waited. What my mother did not know, what none of them knew, was that the company Brandon had just spent 20 minutes bragging about, the one he said was worth $11 million, answered to me, one signature. That was all it was going to take. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to believe in you the most. My name is Avery Collins. I am 32 years old. And for as long as I can remember, I was the wrong one, not wrong in any way I could point to on a map or explain at a dinner table. Just wrong in the specific, accumulated way that families manufacture over years, the slow layering of small comparisons, offhand comments, a certain tone of voice reserved only for you. By the time I was 12, I understood my role in the Collins household the way you understand the weather in a place you've lived your whole life. You don't question it. You just dress accordingly. Brandon was 4 years older than me and golden. In the way firstborn sons in certain families are allowed to be golden. He got good grades because my parents hired 3 tutors and never mentioned it. He got into Yale because my father played golf with the right people and never mentioned that either. When Brandon walked into a room, my mother's face changed, her shoulders dropped. She smiled the way people smile when something they've been worried about turns out fine. When I walked into a room, she picked up whatever was nearest to her hands and found something to straighten. I got into Yale, too. I want to say that plainly, because it tends to get left out of the family version of events. I got in on my own, with my own application, my own essays, my own record. I lasted 2.5 years before I left, not because I failed, my GPA was a 3.7, but because I had been building something on the side since my sophomore year, and it had started making more money than I knew what to do with at 19. I did not tell my parents why I left. I said I needed a break. I said I was figuring things out. Both of those things were partially true, which is the most you can usually offer a family like mine and expect them to sit with it quietly. They did not sit with it quietly. My mother called every week for the first year, not to ask how I was, to remind me what I had given up, to read me a list of Brandon's recent accomplishments the way a doctor reads off vital signs, methodically, without warmth, as if the numbers alone were supposed to fix something. He passed the bar. He made partner. He was being written up in the Connecticut Law Tribune. He had bought a house in Darien, with 4 bedrooms and a mudroom and a kitchen that had been featured in a local magazine. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with second-hand furniture and a laptop that overheated if I ran too many tabs. I worked 16-hour days. I ate a lot of rice and canned soup, and I did not call home unless I had to. By the time I was 24, I had my first real exit. A logistics software company I'd co-founded with a friend from Yale sold for just under $4 million. I took my share, paid taxes, reinvested most of it, kept enough to buy a good mattress and a laptop that didn't overheat. I did not tell my parents. I want to explain why, because I think people assume silence like mine comes from fear or shame. It didn't. It came from something colder and more deliberate than that. I had watched my entire childhood what happened when I gave my family information. It became ammunition. It became the subject of dinner table analysis, of phone calls to aunts and uncles, of quiet recalibrations of where I ranked against Brandon. I decided very early on that the only protection I had was to give them nothing to work with, so I gave them nothing. I joined Meridian Capital Group at 26 as a senior associate. I made VP at 28. At 31, the board voted me in as COO. Meridian managed roughly $2.4 billion in private assets. We had offices in New York, Chicago, and London. James Hargrove, our CEO, was 61 years old and had been in the business for 30 years. He told me once, over coffee in his corner office, overlooking 6th Avenue, that I was the sharpest operator he had worked with in 2 decades. I thanked him and asked him to keep it brief because we had a call at 3. The only person in my personal life who knew any of this was my friend Dana, who had been with me since Brooklyn, and who I trusted with a kind of absolute, unspoken certainty you can only build over years of shared struggle. Everyone else, my college friends, my neighbors, the man I had dated for 8 months the previous year, knew I worked in finance. That was all I offered. It was enough for most people. For the Collins family annual summer reunion, held every July at my parents' house in Greenwich, I had a protocol. I drove my personal car, a used Honda I kept specifically for family visits. I wore clothes that read as pleasant but unremarkable. I brought a bottle of wine that cost exactly the right amount to be polite without prompting questions. I left my Meridian phone in the glove compartment and carried only my personal one. I had done this for 6 years without incident. This July, I almost didn't go. Dana told me to skip it. She said it over Thai food 2 weeks before the reunion. Chopsticks pointed in my direction, voice flat and certain. You don't owe them a performance, Avery. You've been going back every year, and every year you come home and you don't talk for 3 days. She wasn't wrong. She was rarely wrong about things like this. But something had shifted this year. Meridian had been in quiet negotiations since March to acquire Brandon's firm, Collins and Mercer Law. 11 attorneys, solid regional reputation, valued at just over 11 million. The deal was nearly closed. It needed one final signature. Mine. I had recused myself from the early stages, let our M&A team handle the due diligence. But the final authorization on acquisitions above 10 million required the COO's sign-off. That was in the bylaws. That was me. I had not told James. I had not told anyone at Meridian that the founding partner of Collins and Mercer was my brother. I kept waiting for the right moment to disclose it, and then kept deciding it wasn't necessary yet. The deal was clean. Brandon's firms was a legitimate acquisition target. My personal history with him had no bearing on the financials. That was what I told myself, driving up I-95 on a Saturday morning in July, the Honda's air conditioning working harder than it should have. A bottle of Sauvignon Blanc in a tote bag on the passenger seat. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 11:43. The lawn was already full of cars. I could hear my cousin Marcus's kids screaming somewhere near the pool. I sat in the Honda for 90 seconds. Then I got out. The reunion ran on a schedule my mother had been refining for 22 years. 11 to 1 was arrival and mingling on the back lawn, which my parents had re-landscaped 3 years ago at a cost Diane mentioned whenever possible. 1 to 3 was the lunch buffet, catered this year by a woman named Sylvia, who did events in Westchester, and whose business card my mother had already placed on every folding table. 3 to 5 was what my father called family time, which meant the men gathered near the fire pit and talked about investments, and the women were expected to admire whatever Courtney had most recently purchased. After 5, people drifted. By 7, most of them were gone. I had survived 17 of these. I knew the terrain. I came around the side of the house, through the garden gate, and found Dana's prediction already proving accurate within 4 minutes. My Aunt Lorraine intercepted me near the hydrangeas to tell me Brandon had been quoted in the Hartford Courant. My cousin Melissa asked if I was still doing that finance thing. My Uncle Pete shook my hand with the particular energy of someone who couldn't remember what I did but felt bad about it. I smiled. I asked about their kids. I kept moving. My mother found me at the drinks table. Deanne Collins was 61 and had the bearing of a woman who had decided very young that elegance was a form of armor. She wore a cream linen dress and pearl earrings, and her hair was set in a way that suggested she had been to the salon that morning. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, a quick, efficient scan, like a customs agent checking for contraband. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine, Mom. You look great. Brandon and Courtney got here at 10:30. She said it the way you say a thing that is both informational and corrective. I had a drive. She handed me a glass of sparkling water I hadn't asked for. "He's going to make an announcement at lunch. I want you to be supportive." I said I would be supportive. I took the sparkling water. She moved away toward a cluster of relatives near the pergola, and I stood there for a moment, alone, watching the lawn fill up with people who shared my blood and very little else. Brandon found me an hour later. He looked good. I'll say that. He had the easy, inhabited confidence of a man who had never once in his life been asked to prove himself to his own family. He was taller than me by 6 inches, broader through the shoulders, and he had our father's way of standing in a room like he expected it to rearrange itself around him. Courtney was beside him in a yellow sundress, holding a mimosa, scanning the crowd with the focused energy of someone keeping score. "Avery." He said my name the way you say a thing you found in a junk drawer. Not unpleasant, just mildly surprising it was still there. "Hey, Brandon. You drive up this morning?" "Yeah, still have that Honda." I looked at him. "Still have that Honda." Courtney laughed softly at something that hadn't been a joke. We stood in the particular silence of people who have run out of safe topics and know it. Then Brandon tilted his head slightly, the way he did when he was shifting gears. "How's work?" "Good," I said. "Busy, still at that." What is it, investment firm? Something like that. He nodded like that, confirmed something he'd already decided. You should talk to Dad about your 401k situation. He knows a guy in Stamford. Solid, straightforward, good for people who are just getting started. I was the COO of a firm that managed $2.4 billion. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Lunch was set up under a long white tent on the east side of the lawn. 43 people settled around tables covered in cream linen, and Sylvia's staff moved through with plates of poached salmon and roasted vegetables and a cold cucumber soup that my mother had specified in writing. My father said grace. My mother dabbed her eyes at the part about family. I ate my soup and watched the tree line at the edge of the property and thought about the acquisition documents sitting on my desk in New York. Then my father tapped his fork against his glass. Before we eat, Brandon has some news he'd like to share. Brandon stood. He buttoned the middle button of his blazer, which was a thing he did when he wanted to look like he was taking the podium. He smiled at Courtney. He looked around the table. So most of you know that Collins and Mercer has been growing steadily for the past few years. He paused to let this settle. What I can now share with the family is that we've had a formal acquisition offer come through from a private investment group. Independent valuation puts the firm at just over $11 million. The table responded the way my family always responded to Brandon's news, with a specific, collective warmth, a rising murmur of congratulations and exclamations, my Aunt Lorraine pressing her hand to her chest, my Uncle Pete saying, 11 million Jesus. My mother looking around the table to make sure everyone was witnessing her son's moment. My father raised his glass. To Brandon. To Brandon. The table echoed. I raised my glass. I drank. Brandon sat down, and then, with the timing he had perfected over 36 years of being the golden child, he turned to gaze across the table to me. So, Avery, his voice was pleasant, carrying, calibrated to be heard. What about you? What's going on in your world? Still figuring things out? The table went the particular quiet of people who have just been handed something uncomfortable and don't know whether to look at it or away. I set down my fork. My mother said, from 3 seats down, Avery, your brother asked you a question. I looked at Brandon. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who was studying his salmon with the focused attention of a man who had decided a long time ago that discomfort was something women sorted out. Things are going well, I said. Thank you for asking. Still in finance? Courtney said. There was honey in her voice and something else underneath it. Yes. Doing what exactly? Brandon pressed. He was smiling. It was a smile I had known my whole life, the one that looked like curiosity but was actually a door held slightly open to let the cold in. I thought about the acquisition file on my desk, about the signature page with my name printed below the signature line, about the clause in the Meridian bylaws that gave the COO final authorization on all acquisitions above 10 million. Asset management. I said simply. Brandon nodded slowly. Right. He picked up his fork. Well, good for you, Avery. Good for you for keeping at it. My mother exhaled in a way that was somehow both quiet and audible to everyone within 8 feet. We worry about you, Diane said. Not to me exactly. More to the table. We always have. You've always done things your own way, and we respect that, we do. But some of us just want to see you settled, stable. You know, she looked at me with the patient, tired expression of a woman who had been disappointed for so long she had stopped recognizing it as disappointment. We love you. We just wish things had gone a little differently for you. The table was very quiet. Your brother has built something real, she continued. $11 million. That's not luck, that's years of hard work and good choices and knowing what you want. Her voice had the gentle, rehearsed cadence of something she had said many times to herself before saying it out loud. I just hope someday you'll find that. Whatever your version of it looks like, 43 people were looking at me, or very deliberately not looking at me, which amounts to the same thing. I picked up my glass. I drank the rest of my water. I hope so too, Mom, I said. I stood up, excused myself, and walked around the side of the house to the garden, where no one could see me, and I took out my Meridian phone from the inside pocket of my jacket where I had been carrying it all morning. There was one message from James Hargrove. Acquisition timeline moved up. Board wants to close Monday. Need your authorization before EOD, Sunday. Call when you can. I stood in my parents' garden. Between the roses my mother tended obsessively and the stone wall my father had built himself 30 years ago, and I read that message twice. Then I typed back, I'll call you in 10 minutes. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. What I felt, standing there in the garden, with bees moving through the roses and the sound of my family's laughter drifting over from the tent, was something quieter and more complicated. A long, slow recognition that the moment I had been carrying around for 6 years, the one I had never planned for and never sought out, had found me anyway, on a Saturday in July, in my parents' garden. While Brandon's salmon got cold, I walked to the far end of the garden, past the stone wall and the row of boxwoods my mother had planted the year Brandon made partner, and I called James. He picked up on the second ring, Avery. Good. Where are you, Connecticut? Family thing. Right. James had worked with me for 6 years and had learned not to ask follow-up questions about my personal life. It was one of the things I respected most about him. So the Collins and Mercer timeline. Franklin from M&A got a call from their managing partner this morning asking to accelerate. Apparently there's another offer on the table, smaller, but the other party can close faster. I leaned against the stone wall. Through the gap in the boxwoods, I could see the edge of the tent, the white linen, the movement of Sylvia's catering staff collecting plates. How much faster? They want a decision by Sunday evening. If we confirm authorization, we close Monday morning. If we don't, they take the other offer by noon Monday. James paused. Franklin says the other offer is around 8.2. They'll take the 11 if we can move. We can move, I said. I need your formal sign-off, Avery. Email or the portal. Board's requirement on anything above 10. I know the bylaws, James. Of course you do. A brief silence. Everything all right? I looked at the tent. I could see Brandon's blazer, that particular shade of navy, at the head of the center table. I could see my mother leaning toward my Aunt Lorraine. I could see my father nodding at something my Uncle Pete was saying, his glass raised in the loose, comfortable gesture of a man at ease in his world. Everything's fine, I said. I'll send the authorization tonight. Good. Franklin will have the final package to you by 6. We hung up. I stood there a moment longer, the phone warm in my hand, the garden very still around me. A bee landed on the stone wall 2 inches from my fingers and sat there for a moment, considering something, then flew away. The acquisition was clean. I had reviewed the due diligence myself, twice, in the 3 weeks since M&A had flagged it as near ready. Collins and Mercer was a legitimate firm, solid contracts, no outstanding litigation, a client base that complemented 2 of Meridian's existing portfolio companies. The deal made sense on every level that mattered. I had not planned this. I need to say that again, because I think the shape of what happened can make it look calculated in a way it wasn't. I had not sought out my brother's firm. I had not maneuvered to put myself in this position. The world had simply arranged itself this way, the way the world sometimes does, without asking your permission or consulting your feelings about it. What I had decided, in the 3 weeks since I'd understood what was happening, was that I would not remove myself from it. I had recused from deals before, when there was a genuine conflict of interest, a financial entanglement, a relationship that compromised my judgment. I examined this one from every angle I had. The conflict here was personal. It was history. It was the accumulated weight of 32 years of being the wrong child in my particular family. None of that affected the financials. I put the Meridian phone back in my inside pocket and stood up straight and walked back to the tent. The lunch had moved into its slower, post-meal phase. People sitting back, coffee appearing, the children released from the kids' table to run toward the pool. I took a seat at the edge of the gathering, near my cousin Marcus and his wife Petra, who were the only people at these events I genuinely liked. Marcus was a high school history teacher in New Haven and had no investment in the Collins family mythology. Petra was from Sao Paulo and found the entire operation mildly anthropological. You okay? Marcus said quietly, without looking at me. Fine, your mom was. I know what my mom was. I picked up a cup of coffee that had appeared in front of me. How are the kids? He let it go. That was the thing about Marcus. He always let it go. We sat for 20 minutes in the particular piece of people who have made their accommodations with a difficult situation. Around us, the reunion churned on. My father showing someone the new addition to the garage. Courtney organizing the younger cousins for a group photo. My Aunt Lorraine telling the story about the summer house in Maine that she told at every family gathering and that got longer each year. Then I felt it before I saw it. A small, specific shift in the atmosphere near the drinks table. I looked up. Brandon was standing with his blazer jacket pushed back on his hips, one hand in his pocket, talking to our cousin Derek. But his eyes were on the ground in front of him, and there was something in his posture, a slight stiffness, a careful stillness, that made me look down too. My wallet was open on the grass near the leg of his chair. It must have slipped from my bag when I'd set it down before lunch. And the Meridian Capital Group employee ID card, the one I was supposed to have left in the glove compartment of the Honda, was sitting face up on the lawn in the afternoon sun. Derek noticed it first. He picked it up, looked at it, and handed it to Brandon with the uncomplicated helpfulness of someone who didn't know what he was handing over. Brandon read it. I watched his face move through three expressions in approximately 2 seconds. Confusion. Then a kind of reflexive dismissal. Then something I couldn't quite read, something that might have been the first faint edge of doubt if it hadn't been immediately overwritten by the easier option. He looked up and found me watching him from across the tent. He held up the card. Avery. His voice carried the particular ease of a man about to land a joke. Chief Operating Officer, Meridian Capital Group. He looked around at the small cluster of relatives nearby. "You been carrying around a fake business card this whole time?" A few people laughed, not everyone. "Enough. It's not fake," I said. "Come on," he was still smiling. "Meridian Capital. That's a serious firm. James Hargrove runs that outfit. You work for James Hargrove?" "I work with James Hargrove," I said. "There's a difference." More laughter. My mother had appeared at the edge of the group, drawn by the sound, and the shift in energy the way she always was. Brandon set the card on the table. "You could have just said you were in between things, Avery. Nobody's judging you here, I know," I said. "Go." He shook his head with the fond, patient exasperation of someone humoring a child. "That's a big title, it is," I agreed. He waited for me to say something else, to clarify or backtrack or laugh along. I didn't. I picked up my cup and drank the rest of my coffee, which had gone cold, and I watched him decide in real time that the most comfortable explanation was the that required the least revision to his existing understanding of me. "I think it's great you're putting yourself out there," he said finally. "Networking, building your brand, whatever you call it these days. Good for you." He slid the card back across the table toward me. He turned back to Derek and resumed whatever they'd been talking about. The small crowd dispersed. My mother watched me for a moment with an expression I had long ago stopped trying to translate. I put the card back in my wallet. I put my wallet in my bag. I thought about the acquisition package Franklin was preparing. I thought about the authorization I would send tonight, from the same Honda my brother had just asked about, with that particular tone of voice. I thought about Monday morning, when the lawyers would be in the room, when the documents would be on the table, when the name at the bottom of the authorization would resolve itself from an abstraction into a fact. I didn't feel angry. I want to say that clearly, because anger is the easy emotion, and this wasn't anger. What I felt was something older and steadier than that. A kind of patience that had been building. For so long it had calcified into something structural, something load-bearing, something that didn't require my attention anymore, because it had become part of the architecture of who I was. I picked up my bag. I found Marcus and Petra near the pool and spent a quiet hour watching their kids splash in the shallow end. At 6:17 that evening, sitting in the Honda in my parents' driveway with the engine running and the air conditioning finally doing its job, I opened the Meridian portal on my phone. I read the acquisition package one final time, all 43 pages. Then I entered my authorization code, typed my name into the signature field, and pressed confirm. The screen returned a single line: authorization received. Collins and Mercer acquisition confirmed. Closing Monday, 9 a.m. I put the car in reverse. I drove back down I-95 with the windows cracked and the radio off, and the thing I remember most about that drive is how quiet it was. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that settles over you when something large has been set in motion, and there is nothing left to do but wait. Monday came the way important days always do. Quietly, without fanfare, indistinguishable from the outside from any other morning. I was at my desk by 7:15. The Meridian offices occupied the 34th and 35th floors of a building on 6th Avenue, and at that hour the city below was still working itself into the day. Delivery trucks, early joggers, the particular gray-blue light of a Manhattan morning that I had never stopped finding beautiful, no matter how many times I had seen it. I had a standing order from the coffee place downstairs. One Americano, no sugar, handed to whoever was at the reception desk before I arrived. It was there when I came in. I took it without breaking stride. My assistant, a 26-year-old named Priya, who had graduated top of her class from Wharton and whom I was fairly certain would have my job in 10 years if she wanted it, looked up from her monitor as I passed, Franklin sent the closing package at 6:50, she said. Conference room B, 9 o'clock. Mr. Hargrove is already in. Thank you. Also. She paused in the way she paused when something required handling. The managing partner of Collins and Mercer called the main line at 7, asked to speak with the CO directly. I stopped. What did you tell him? That you'd be available after the closing. I looked at her. Good call. She nodded and turned back to her screen. I walked to my office, set down my coffee, and stood at the window for a moment looking at the city. Somewhere in Connecticut, in a colonial house in Darien, with 4 bedrooms and a mudroom and a kitchen that had been featured in a local magazine, my brother was either getting dressed for a Monday morning or had already gotten a phone call. I thought about which one it was. Then I stopped thinking about it and opened my email. The closing itself took 2 hours and 40 minutes. This is the part people always imagine differently when they picture these things. They expect drama, raised voices, sudden revelations, a moment where the truth lands in the room like a stone, dropped into still water. The reality of a corporate acquisition closing is considerably more procedural. Conference room B had a long table and 8 chairs and a credenza with a coffee urn that no one touched because everyone had their own coffee. Franklin Wu, our head of M&A, sat across from the 2 attorneys representing Collins and Mercer. A paralegal organized documents into folders with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 300 times. I sat at the head of the table. The Collins and Mercer attorneys were a woman named Sandra Cho and a man I didn't know named Phil Garrett. Sandra I recognized from a conference 2 years prior, sharp, precise, not a person who wasted words. Phil seemed newer. He kept glancing at the door. This was not in the room. This was not unusual. Founding partners rarely attended their own acquisition closings. They sent attorneys. They sat somewhere else and waited for a phone call that would tell them their number had cleared. I had structured dozens of these. The absence of the seller was standard. What was not standard was the moment, 40 minutes into the closing, when Sandra Cho looked up from the document she was reviewing and said, very evenly, Miss Collins, I want to confirm, are you related to Brandon Collins? Founding partner of Collins and Mercer? The room went still in the particular way. Rooms go still when a question has arrived that everyone present had been wondering about, but no one had asked. Franklin looked at me. The paralegal stopped shuffling papers. He's my brother, I said. Sandra held my gaze for a moment. And you are the authorizing sue on this acquisition. I am, she nodded slowly, the nod of a person recalibrating. Mr. Collins was not informed of your involvement in this transaction? Our M&A team handled all communications with Collins and Mercer through the standard process, I said. My name appears on the authorization, which is part of the closing package your client received Friday evening. Sandra looked at the document in front of her. She found the page. She read it. Phil Garrett was very still. I see, Sandra said. She set the document down. She looked at it for another moment. Then she looked up. My client received this package Friday at 6:17 p.m. He called our office at 6:49. She paused. He was not aware, until Friday evening, that his sister was the CEO of Meridian Capital. I understand, I said. He asked us to pause the closing pending a conversation with Meridian leadership. Franklin leaned forward slightly. Sandra, I said, the acquisition timeline, terms, and valuation were negotiated entirely through your client's legal representatives over a period of 4 months. Every document your client signed was reviewed by your office. The Meridian authorization process is standard and disclosed in our acquisition framework, which your client received at the outset of negotiations. My name and title appear on the document your client signed acknowledging receipt of that framework. I paused. Is your client contesting the terms of the acquisition? Sandra was quiet for a moment. No, she said. Is your client alleging any procedural irregularity? A longer pause. No, then I'd like to continue, we continued. The closing wrapped at 11:50. Sandra and Phil gathered their documents with the careful efficiency of people processing something larger than the transaction in front of them. Franklin shook hands with both of them. I thanked them for their time. The paralegal collected the folders. When the room had cleared, Franklin stayed. He was 53 and had been in M&A for 25 years and was not a man easily rattled. He stood at the end of the conference table with his hands in his pockets and looked at me with an expression that was not quite a question. His brother? He said. My brother, I corrected. He processed this for a moment. How long have you known? Since March. When you flagged the file and you didn't recuse, I reviewed the grounds for recusal. The conflict was personal, not financial. The deal was clean. The deal was clean, he repeated, not challenging it. Just sitting with it. Franklin? Yeah. We got them at 11 million too, I said. The competing offer was 8.2, that's 2.8 million in additional value for our portfolio. The acquisition is sound. The process was clean. I picked up my coffee cup, which was empty. Any other questions? He looked at me for a long moment. Then one corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. None, he said. He left. I sat alone in conference room B for a few minutes, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass. 43 stories below, 6th Avenue moved the way it always moved. Continuous, indifferent, enormous. My personal phone buzzed. I looked at it. The screen showed a number I recognized immediately. The Darien landline my brother had installed when he and Courtney bought the house, because Courtney felt landlines were more elegant than cell phones for a home of that caliber. I let it ring. It rang 4 times. Then it stopped. Then it started again. I set the phone face down on the conference table and looked at the city for another few minutes. The morning light had shifted, the gray-blue burned off now, the buildings bright and hard-edged in the late morning sun. I thought about Brandon standing in front of 43 family members, with his blazer buttoned and his glass raised. I thought about the card on the lawn, face up in the afternoon light. I thought about my mother's voice. We just wish things had gone a little differently for you. Drifting over the hydrangeas. I picked up the phone. I turned it over. I looked at the screen. I put it back down. There would be time for phone calls. There would be time for all of it, the explanations, the recriminations, the long and complicated conversation that had been building for 32 years, and that was now, finally, unavoidable. But not yet. Right now, on a Monday morning in July, with the city blazing outside the window, and an empty coffee cup in front of me, and the quiet hum of a building where 260 people were at their desks, doing the work that I had spent 6 years building into something real. I was going to let my brother's calls go to voicemail, and then I was going to get back to work. Brandon left 4 voicemails on Monday. I know this because Priya flagged them. He had escalated from my personal line to the Meridian main number, then to Franklin's direct line, then back to the main number again, each call logged with a timestamp and a brief note from whoever had taken it. The notes were professional and neutral in the way Priya trained everyone on her team to be professional and neutral, but reading them in sequence gave you a clear picture of a man moving through stages. 9:04 a.m. Mr. Collins called, asked to speak with Kuo, was told Ms. Collins was in a meeting. Left number 11:37 a.m. Mr. Collins called again, indicated urgency, asked to be transferred to Mr. Hargrove. Transferred to Mr. Hargrove's assistant. No message left. 2:15 p.m. Mr. Collins called, asked whether there had been a mistake in the closing documents, was told all closing documentation had been reviewed and confirmed. He asked for Ms. Collins directly, was told she was unavailable. He asked when she would be available, was told her schedule would need to be checked. He did not leave a callback time. 4:48 p.m., Mr. Collins called, said it was a family matter, left his cell number. I read all 4 notes. I forwarded them to our legal team with a brief note asking them to handle any further inquiries related to the Collins and Mercer's acquisition through the standard post-closing process. Then I closed the email thread and went back to the quarterly portfolio review I'd been working on before lunch. I did not hear from Brandon again that day. Tuesday was quiet. Wednesday was quiet. I worked. I ate lunch at my desk. I went to the gym at 6 in the morning and home by 9 at night, and I did not think about Greenwich or the reunion or the look on Sandra Cho's face when she found my name on the authorization page, or I tried not to. Trying not to think about something is its own kind of thinking about it. Thursday morning, Priya appeared in my office doorway at 10:15, with her tablet and her careful expression. "You have a call," she said. "I have 17 calls. This one's your mother." I looked up from my screen. Priya had worked for me for 3 years. She knew almost nothing about my family. Only that they existed, that I visited them occasionally and returned from those visits quieter than usual, and that calls from them should be flagged separately from the normal queue. She had developed this policy on her own initiative, which was one of the reasons I had promoted her twice. "Tell her, I'll call her back this evening," I said. "She's called 3 times this week. This is the 4th. I held Priya's gaze for a moment. She was not pushing. She was simply giving me information, the way good assistants give you information, completely, without editorial. And then wait, put her through. I said. Priya nodded and closed the door behind her. I picked up the desk phone. Mom, Avery. My mother's voice had a texture I recognized immediately, the particular compression of someone who had been rehearsing this call for several days and was now discovering that the rehearsal hadn't covered everything. I think we need to talk. Okay. A pause. Brandon called us on Monday. I assumed he would. He was. She stopped. Started again. He was very upset, Avery. I waited. He said you. That Meridian. She paused again. He said you bought his company. Meridian acquired Collins and Mercer. Yes. The deal closed Monday morning. The silence that followed was long enough that I could hear the sounds of my parents' house through the phone. The central air. The faint tick of the grandfather clock in the front hallway, the distant sound of something on television in the room my father used as a study. You're really the COO, my mother said finally. It was not a question exactly. It was something in between a question and an acknowledgement, the sound of a fixed understanding beginning, very slowly, to move. I have been for the past 14 months, I said. I was VP before that. I joined Meridian 6 years ago. Another silence. Why didn't you tell us? I had thought about how to answer this question for 6 years. I had rehearsed it in the shower and on the subway, and in the car driving up I-95 and in the garden between the roses and the stone wall. I had 100 versions of it, ranging from careful to brutal, and sitting now in my office with the city outside the window, and my mother's voice small and compressed in my ear. I discarded all of them. You weren't asking, I said. She made a sound that was not quite a response. Every time I came home, I continued, keeping my voice even. The conversation was about Brandon. What Brandon had done, what Brandon had built, what Brandon's firm was worth. I could have walked in with a press release and a PowerPoint, and you would have found a way to make it about whether I was settled enough or stable enough, or had made the right choices. I paused. So I stopped offering information. That's not a criticism, Mom. It's just what happened. That's not fair, she said, but her voice had lost some of its compression. It sounded smaller now, uncertain in a way I was not accustomed to hearing from Diane Collins. I'm not trying to be unfair. I'm trying to answer your question. A long pause. Brandon is very upset. I imagine he is. He feels like you. He used the word ambush, Avery. I looked at the window, the city, the hard bright geometry of it in the afternoon light. The acquisition was 4 months in the making, I said. The documents were reviewed by his legal team at every stage. My name and title were on the authorization he acknowledged in writing at the outset. If Brandon feels ambushed, that's a conversation he should have with his attorneys about what they were and weren't reading him. He's your brother. I know who he is. Another silence. And then my mother said something I had not expected, something that arrived without the armor of her usual cadence. Are you angry with us, Avery? I sat with that for a moment. The honest answer was complicated in the way that honest answers about families usually are, layered, contradictory, full of things that were true simultaneously and pointed in different directions. I was not angry in the hot, immediate way. I was something older. Something that had been living in me so long it had stopped requiring fuel. I'm not angry, I said. I'm tired. She didn't respond right away. I've been tired for a long time, I said, of coming home and being the wrong one. Of watching you light up for Brandon and go through the motions for me. Of being the cautionary tale at your own family reunion. My voice was still even. I was not performing. I was simply saying things that were true in the plainest way I knew how to say them. I'm not angry. I just stopped needing your approval somewhere along the way. And I think that's what upset everyone most. Not that I failed, but that I stopped caring whether you thought I had. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. I didn't know you felt that way, my mother said. I know you didn't, a very long pause. The 11 million, she started. Mom, we don't need to talk about the financials, she went quiet. I looked at my desk, the portfolio review, the stack of folders Priya had organized that morning. The Americano, half drunk, gone cold 2 hours ago. I have a meeting at 11:30, I said. I'll call you this weekend, okay, she said. Small. Careful, tell Dad I said hello. I will. I hung up. I sat for a moment with my hand still on the receiver. Then I picked up the Americano, cold or not, and drank what was left of it. The meeting at 11:30 was a portfolio review for one of our mid-cap holdings in the Southeast. Nothing to do with Connecticut or family reunions or the particular sound of my mother's voice recalibrating in real time. I was 10 minutes early. I sat at the head of the table. I ran the meeting. At no point did I think about what Brandon was doing in Darien. At no point did I think about whether my mother had gone back to the television after we hung up. or sat at the kitchen table instead, or called my Aunt Lorraine to process what had just happened, which was what she always did when something large required processing. I ran the meeting. I took notes. I made 2 decisions that would be executed by the end of the week, and then on Friday afternoon, Brandon showed up at Meridian, not called, not emailed, showed up. In person. In the lobby of our building on 6th Avenue, at 4:47 p.m., with his coat over his arm, and the expression of a man who had decided that the problem with all his previous approaches was that they had allowed me too much control over the terms of engagement. Priya texted me from the front desk, "Your brother is in the lobby. He does not have an appointment. He says it's urgent. How would you like me to handle it?" I read the message. I looked at my screen. I looked at the window. I thought about the reunion, the tent, the 43 people, the salmon, the card on the lawn, and Brandon's smile and my mother's voice saying, "We just wish things had gone a little differently for you." I typed back, "Tell him I have 15 minutes. Conference room A, give him water." I closed my laptop. I took the long way around the floor, past the windows that looked north toward Central Park, which on a clear afternoon in July you could just make out if you stood in the right spot, a thin green line above the density of the city. I found it. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went to conference room. Brandon was standing when I walked in. This was deliberate. I recognized it immediately, the choice to be on his feet rather than seated, to have the physical advantage of height and the psychological advantage of motion. He had done this in arguments since we were teenagers. He had probably done it in depositions. It was a lawyer's instinct, the kind that becomes so automatic you stop knowing you're doing it. I closed the door behind me and sat down. He stayed standing for a moment. Then, recalibrating, he sat too. There was a glass of water in front of him, untouched. He had his coat folded over the chair beside him, and his phone face up on the table, which was another habit I recognized, keeping the exit visible, the options open. We looked at each other across the table. In the conference room light, away from the lawn and the linen and the particular performance of the Collins family reunion, my brother looked tired. Not the soft, manageable tiredness of a busy week. Something harder. Something that had been sitting behind his eyes for a few days and had started to show. "Avery," he said. "Brandon." He looked at the table, then at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I had expected anger. I had prepared for anger, the specific, pressurized variety Brandon deployed when he felt outmaneuvered, loud and architectural, designed to fill a room until there was no air left for anyone else. What I had not prepared for was this, the flatness, the genuine bewilderment underneath it. "Tell you what?" "Specifically?" I said. "Any of it." He opened his hand slightly, a gesture I associated with him in court, addressing a jury. "That you worked here, that you were the Theo, that you," he stopped, "that you were the one signing off on my company. Would you have believed me?" He opened his mouth. "Closed it, at the reunion," I said. "When you found my card on the lawn. Would you have believed me if I had sat down at that table and told you I was the CEO of the firm that was about to acquire Collins and Mercer?" He was quiet for a moment. "That's not the point. I think it's exactly the point. The point," he said, his voice tightening, "is that you had a conflict of interest, and you didn't disclose it, and you sat across from me at our parents' house and let me." He stopped again. "Reorganized. You let me make a fool of myself. You did that independently," I said. Not unkindly, just accurately. His jaw moved. "You could have recused." I reviewed the grounds for recusal. The conflict was personal, not financial. The deal was clean, the process was clean. Your attorneys confirmed it at closing. If you want to contest the acquisition on procedural grounds, you'll need to take that up with our legal team and your own counsel. I paused. "But I don't think that's why you're here." He looked at me for a long moment. "No," he said, "it's not." The city hummed outside the glass, somewhere on the floor beyond the conference room. Phones rang and keyboards moved, and the ordinary machinery of a working Friday afternoon continued without any awareness of the two of us sitting across from each other in conference room A. "I've been running Collins and Mercer for 9 years, Brandon said. His voice had changed, lower, less structured. "I built it from a 2-person shop in a sublet office in Hartford. I recruited every attorney. I brought in every anchor client. 9 years, I know," I said, "and you just—" He made a small, compressed gesture. "Meridian acquired it at $11 million too," I said, "which is $3 million above where you started negotiations 8 months ago. Your attorneys got you a strong deal, Brandon. The acquisition isn't punitive. Collins and Mercer continues as a Meridian subsidiary. Your attorneys retain their positions. Your anchor clients are protected under the terms." I looked at him. This wasn't designed to hurt you, then what was it designed to do? I held his gaze. Make a good return for our portfolio. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at me. You have 2.4 billion under management, roughly, and you've been. For 6 years you've been. He stopped, shook his head slowly. At the reunion. When I asked if you were still figuring things out, yes, and you just, yes. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the light was beginning to shift toward evening, the particular golden quality of a Manhattan Friday afternoon that made even the hard surfaces look briefly warm. Did you know? He said finally. When you came up for the reunion. Did you already know about the acquisition? I'd known for 3 weeks. Something moved across his face. Not anger exactly. More like a man watching a freelancing. I thought you reveal a completely different topography. And you came anyway. Mom would have called for months if I didn't. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Then, after a moment, you should have told me. Maybe, I said. But you wouldn't have listened. You never have, Brandon. Not to me. I've been in the room with you my entire life and you have never once listened to me about anything. You've tolerated me. You've managed me. You've occasionally felt sorry for me in a way you found flattering. I kept my voice, even, but you have never listened to me. He didn't deny it. That surprised me more than anything else that had happened in the past week. He picked up the water glass, set it down without drinking. What happens now? With the firm, the integration timeline is 12 to 18 months. Franklin Wu is your point of contact for operational questions. The terms are in the closing documents. I paused. Your comp structure is protected for 24 months under the acquisition terms. Your attorneys negotiated that specifically. You'll be fine, that's not. He stopped. I don't mean financially. I looked at him. I mean with us, he said. With the family. I was quiet for a moment. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see Priya at her desk, her back to me, working. Beyond her, the floor moved with the easy, purposeful energy of people doing work they understood the shape of. I don't know. I said honestly. Brandon looked at his hands, then back at me. Mom called me after she talked to you, she said. He paused. She said you told her you were tired. I am, of us. Of a version of us, I said. Of the version where I'm the cautionary tale, and you're the proof that the family works. I looked at him steadily. I'm not interested in that version anymore. If there's another one available, I'm open to it. But I'm not going back to the first one. He sat with that. Outside, a cloud moved, and the golden light in the conference room shifted and then settled again. Courtney wants to come to New York next month, he said finally. Not quite a pivot. More like a man trying to find a door in a wall he'd just discovered was there. She wants to. I don't know. She mentioned dinner. Have her call my assistant, I said. We'll find a night. He nodded. He picked up his coat. He stood. And this time it wasn't a tactic. It was just a man getting ready to leave a room. At the door he stopped. The card, he said. On the lawn. When I handed it back to you and said, he didn't finish the sentence. I know what you said I was. I know, Brandon. He stood there a moment longer. Then he nodded once, a small, unadorned nod, nothing of the courtroom in it, and walked out. I sat in conference room A for a few minutes after he left. The water glass was still on the table, still full. I drank it. Then I went back to my office. The portfolio review was still on my screen. I had 3 emails from the Chicago office and a budget summary from Franklin that needed a response before Monday. I answered all of them. At 6:30, Priya knocked on my open door. Anything else before I head out? I looked up. No. Have a good weekend. She gathered her things. At the elevator she paused. Ms. Collins? I looked up again. Whatever happened this week, she said carefully. You seem, she considered the word, lighter? I looked at her for a moment. Good night, Priya, I said. She smiled and stepped into the elevator. I turned back to the window. The city below had made its full transition into evening, lights coming on in the buildings across the avenue, the sky behind them the deep, particular blue of a New York summer dusk. I sat there for a while, just looking at it, not thinking about anything specific. Then my personal phone's buzzed. I picked it up. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. A Connecticut area code. It read, Avery, this is your Aunt Lorraine. I just want you to know that I always thought you were something special. I never said it enough. Call me sometime. I mean it. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and looked back at the city. And for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, I did not feel tired. The 3 weeks after Brandon's visit were the quietest of the entire summer. Not empty quiet, working quiet. The kind that accumulates when a large thing has been resolved and the space it occupied hasn't yet filled with the next large thing. I ran my meetings. I reviewed my portfolios. I flew to Chicago on a Tuesday and back on a Thursday and ate room service in a hotel with a view of Lake Michigan that I barely looked at because I was on a call until 11. Ordinary life. The ordinary life I had built quietly, while my family constructed their understanding of me from the scraps I left behind. Franklin stopped by my office one afternoon with a coffee he hadn't been asked to bring. He set it on my desk and sat down in the chair across from me without being invited, which he had done maybe twice in 6 years. Collins and Mercer integration is tracking well, he said. Good, their managing partner. He paused. Your brother, he's been cooperative, responsive. He sat down with the integration team last week and walked them through the client relationships. No resistance, I nodded. He's good at his job, Franklin said. Not as a compliment exactly. More as a data point. He always has been, I said. Franklin picked up his coffee, set it down. He had something else he wanted to say and was deciding how to say it. This was unusual for Franklin, who had spent 25 years making decisions quickly and was not accustomed to sitting with uncertainty. The board is going to want to talk about your succession plan, he said finally. At the September meeting, James mentioned it to me last week. I looked at him. I'm 32. You're the COO of a $2.4 billion firm. Succession planning isn't about age, he held my gaze. James is looking at the next 10 years. He wants to talk about your trajectory. I sat back. What exactly did he say? He said. Franklin considered his words with the careful precision of a man quoting accurately. He said, he wants to make sure you know what you're building toward. That you're not just running the firm. That you understand you're building it. He paused. I think what he means is that he wants to have the conversation about what comes after him. I looked at the window, the city. The hard, bright geometry of mid-August in Manhattan. Set up the meeting, I said. Franklin nodded. He picked up his coffee and stood. At the door he paused, which was becoming a habit among people who worked near me. For what it's worth, he said, the board already knows what you're building toward. The September meeting is mostly a formality. He left. I sat with that for a moment. Then I went back to work. The call that changed things came on a Wednesday evening in the third week of August. I was at home, my apartment on the Upper West Side. The one I had moved into 4 years ago, when I finally allowed myself to spend money on a place to live in a way that matched what I actually earned rather than what I had trained myself to need. It was not large by the standards of what I could afford. It was exactly large enough. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the west side, a kitchen I actually cooked in, a desk by the window where I worked in the evenings when I didn't want to go back to the office. I was at that desk when my personal phone rang. The Connecticut area code. Not my parents' number, not Aunt Lorraine's. A number I didn't recognize. I answered it. Avery Collins? The voice was male, professional, with the careful neutrality of someone who makes calls like this regularly. This is Avery. My name is Greg Pellman. I'm calling from the Hartford Courant. I'm a business reporter. I'm working on a piece about the Meridian Capital acquisition of Collins and Mercer Law. And I was hoping to ask you a few questions. I set down my pen. How did you get this number? I said, I'm sorry. I reached out to Meridian's communications team, and they suggested I try this contact. I made a note to speak with our communications team about what, suggested, meant in the context of providing personal numbers to journalists. What's the piece about specifically? The acquisition itself, the terms, the strategic rationale. We've spoken with Brandon Collins, who, he paused in the careful way journalists pause, who provided some context about the family connection between himself and the acquiring party's COO. We wanted to give you the opportunity to comment. I was very still. Brandon spoke with you, I said. Yes. Off the record initially, but he's indicated he's willing to go on record. Another careful pause. He described the situation as, and I'm quoting him directly, a deliberate blindsiding by someone who used a professional position to settle a personal score. I looked at the west-facing windows. The sky outside was the deep, saturated blue of late August dusk, the kind that only lasts about 8 minutes before it goes dark. When is the piece running? I said. We're aiming for Sunday. If you'd like to provide a statement, I'd need it by Friday noon. I'll have our communications team reach out to you by tomorrow morning, he said. Thank you for the call, Mr. Pellman. I hung up. I sat at my desk for approximately 90 seconds. Then I called James Hargrove. He picked up on the third ring. Avery, are you at home? Just sat down for dinner. What's wrong? I told him. All of it in the efficient, sequential way I organized most things. The reunion, the card, the conversation with Brandon in conference room A 3 weeks ago. And now the Hartford Courant, and a quote about deliberate blindsiding and personal scores. James was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he said, "How long have you been carrying this?" 6 years, more or less. A pause. I mean, since the acquisition closed. About 3 weeks. Another pause. Longer, Avery. You should have told me about the family connection, I know. Not because the deal was wrong. The deal was right, the process was clean. You know I know that. But I should have known. His voice was even, not angry. The voice of a man who has managed people for 30 years and understands the difference between a conversation and a reprimand. I would have wanted to prepare for exactly this. I understand. I'm sorry, James. Don't apologize. Solve it. A brief pause. What do you need? I need our communications team tonight, our general counsel tonight, and I need you available for a call tomorrow morning. Done, he said. Anything else? I looked at the darkening window. 8 minutes of blue, then nothing. The city lights were coming on now, floor by floor, the buildings filling themselves with light against the dark. I need to know, I said, whether you want me to step back from this. A silence. From the Collins and Mercer integration specifically, I said, or from any aspect of this that creates exposure for the firm. If you want me to, Avery. His voice was quiet but very clear. I want you to fix it. That's what you do. That's what you've always done. He paused. You're not stepping back from anything. I exhaled. Get the team together, he said. I'll be on the call at 8. We hung up. I called Priya. She answered on the first ring, which meant she had been expecting it. I need communications and legal tonight, I said. Whatever it takes. Already on it, she said. I saw the Courant reporter reach out to the comms inbox an hour ago. I flagged it. I held the phone for a moment. Priya, yes? You're getting a raise. A brief pause. I know, she said. Good night, Miss Collins. I set the phone down. I stood up from the desk. I walked to the west-facing windows and stood there in the dark for a moment, looking at the city below. The lights, the movement, the enormous, indifferent, beautiful machinery of it. Then I turned on every light in the apartment, made a pot of coffee, and sat back down at my desk. Brandon had called a reporter. He had gone on record. He had used the word blindsiding and personal score, and by Friday noon, those words would either appear in the Hartford Courant or they would not, depending on what the next 36 hours produced. I had built a $2.4 billion operation from a sublet office and a laptop that overheated. I had done it quietly, without credit, without anyone in my family knowing my name on a building, or a masthead, or an acquisition document. I had done it in the specific, accumulated way that difficult things get done, one day after another, one decision after another, in the steady, unglamorous discipline of someone who had decided a long time ago that results were the only argument worth making. Brandon had made his move. Now I was going to make mine. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the communications brief our team had started drafting. I read it once, made 11 changes, and sent it back with a note that said, "This needs to be airtight by 6 a.m. Call me if you hit a wall." Then I opened the acquisition file. And I started to read. The Meridian statement ran Friday morning at 9:15. Our communications director, a woman named Beth Okafor, who had handled crisis messaging for 3 Fortune 500 companies before joining us, and who approached every problem with the calm of someone who had seen worse and fixed it, released it through our standard press channels simultaneously with a direct email to Greg Pellman at the Hartford Courant. It was 4 paragraphs, clean, factual, precise. It outlined the acquisition timeline, the due diligence process, the legal review, and the terms. It noted that the COO's authorization was a standard bylaw requirement, that the conflict disclosure protocols had been reviewed by outside counsel, and that the acquisition had been conducted in full accordance with Meridian's documented procedures. The 4th paragraph contained a single sentence that Beth and I had written together at 1:30 in the morning at my kitchen table while the coffee went cold. The characterization of this transaction as personally motivated is without factual basis and is inconsistent with the documented record of a 4-month, arm's-length negotiation process. We did not name Brandon. We did not need to. By 10:30, Pellman had replied to Beth's email with 3 follow-up questions, all of them procedural, none of them hostile. By noon, he had replied again to say that the piece was being reframed as a broader feature on family dynamics in corporate M&A. A trend piece, he called it, citing 2 other cases from the past year. Brandon's quote about blindsiding and personal scores had been reduced to a clause in the 4th paragraph. Beth forwarded me the final draft at 2 p.m. She attached a single line. "We're good," I replied. "Thank you. I put my phone in my desk drawer and did not look at it for 3 hours. The piece ran Sunday. It was fair, thorough, and moderately interesting. It mentioned Meridian twice and the Collins family connection once, in a sentence that was accurate and tonally neutral, and that most readers would have passed over without registering. James called me Sunday afternoon from his house in Westchester to say he had read it and that we were done with this particular chapter. Clean exit, he said. Clean exit, I agreed. The board meeting is September 12th, he said. Block the afternoon. I blocked the afternoon. The family went quiet in the weeks that followed. My mother did not call on Thursday as she sometimes did. My father did not call at all, which was consistent with a man who had decided 30 years ago that difficulty was something women sorted out, and who had not updated this position since. Brandon did not call. Courtney did not call. Aunt Lorraine texted me a photograph of her garden. I texted back a picture of Central Park taken from my office window and wrote, "Coming along nicely." She sent back 3 heart emojis and a photograph of a pie. I saved both photographs. I did not examine why. The Collins family annual Labor Day gathering was held the first Saturday in September, a smaller affair than the July reunion. Immediate family only, my parents' back patio, a grill and folding chairs, and the particular low-grade tension of people who were pretending that the summer had been ordinary. I had not been planning to go. Dana had opinions about this, delivered over dinner on the Thursday before, with the directness she reserved for things she felt strongly about. "You have to go," she said. "I don't have to do anything, you have to go," she repeated. "Not for them. For you. Because if you don't go, the story they tell themselves, and each other, and everyone at that table, is that you're hiding, that you won, that you're too big for them now." She pointed her fork at me. "You're not hiding, and you're not too big for them, and you are absolutely going." "I might be a little too big for them," I said. "Avery," I went. I drove up in the Honda on Saturday morning. Same bottle of wine, different vintage. I came through the garden gate at 11:40, and the yard was smaller than the July reunion and quieter, just my parents, Brandon and Courtney, and my Uncle Pete and Aunt Lorraine, who lived close enough to make the smaller gatherings. My mother met me at the gate. She looked at me for a moment, with the careful, measuring expression I had known my whole life, the customs agent scan, and then she did something she had not done in longer than I could easily remember. She put both arms around me and held on. It was brief. 10 seconds, maybe 12. She stepped back before I could respond fully, smoothing the front of her blouse, her eyes bright in a way she would not have permitted if she'd had more warning. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Me too, Mom." My father shook my hand. He held it a beat longer than usual and nodded at me with the wordless, compressed sincerity of a man who had decided to communicate something important through grip strength and eye contact. It was the most emotionally available I had seen him in 15 years. "Good to have you," he said. "Good to be here, Dad." Aunt Lorraine embraced me immediately and at length and told me 3 times that I looked wonderful, and that she had been bragging about me to everyone at her book club, which I chose to believe entirely. Brandon was at the grill. He had the tongs in one hand and a beer in the other, and he was turned slightly away from the gate in a way that could have been coincidental and probably wasn't. Courtney was beside him, quieter than July, her usual point-keeping energy dialed down to something closer to ordinary. I walked over. Brandon looked up. He held the tongs. He looked at me with the face of a man who had spent 6 weeks reorganizing his understanding of his sister and had not quite finished. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He nodded at the grill. "Burgers and chicken. Mom wants the chicken done first." "Sounds right." A pause. He flipped a burger. Courtney made potato salad. I looked at Courtney. "That sounds great," Courtney said. "It's my grandmother's recipe," in a voice that was making an effort. I recognized the effort. I decided to meet it. "I'd love the recipe sometime," I said. She looked at me. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatic, not a revelation, just a small, quiet recalibration. "Sure," she said. "I'll text it to you." Brandon flipped another burger. The grill popped and smoked. Above us the sky was the flat, clear blue of a Connecticut September morning, the kind that carries the first suggestion of the fall that's coming without committing to it yet. "Franklin says the integration is tracking well," Brandon said, not looking at me, watching the grill. "It is." "The team he sent? Kenji and the woman from Chicago, Alicia, they've been good. Professional." He paused. "Better than I expected. I'll tell them you said so." He nodded, flipped a piece of chicken. "My anchor clients have been. They're fine." Settled. Another pause. "I was worried about Hendrix Manufacturing. 22-year relationship. Old man Hendricks doesn't like change, did he stay? He called me personally. Brandon almost smiled. Said as long as I was still his attorney, he didn't care who signed the checks. Good, yeah. He set down the tongs for a moment, picked up his beer. Yeah, it was good. We stood there by the grill in the particular quiet of two people who have too much history to fill silences easily and have decided, without discussing it, to try anyway. Then Brandon said, without looking at me, the board meeting. James Hargrove's firm. September 12th. I looked at him. He was still watching the grill. Word gets around in Connecticut legal circles. I heard your name mentioned in a context that, he paused. Let's just say Franklin's comment about the future of the firm wasn't hypothetical. I said nothing. You're going to run it, he said. Not a question, aren't you? I looked at the grill, the smoke, the flat blue sky above the Collins backyard in September. We'll see what the board says, I said. He picked up the tongs. Right. He turned a burger. Right. Uncle Pete appeared at my elbow, wanting to know about the potato salad, and the conversation dissolved into the ordinary business of a family gathering. Plates and condiments, and my father's very strong opinions about how burgers should be cooked, which had not changed in 30 years and showed no signs of changing now. I sat with Aunt Lorraine and Pete through most of lunch, and they were easy and warm and asked about my apartment and my work with the genuine, uncomplicated interest of people who had decided I was something worth being interested in. At one point, I looked up and found my mother watching me from across the patio. She had a plate in her hand and a glass of lemonade, and she was standing in the particular way she stood when she was thinking something she hadn't decided yet how to say. When she saw me looking, she didn't look away. She held my gaze for a moment, then she smiled. Not the smile she gave Brandon, not the performance smile for company, or the careful smile for difficult moments. Something simpler. Something that reached her eyes. I held it for a moment, then I smiled back. The afternoon moved through its natural arc. People drifted toward the lawn. My father told a long story about a road trip he and Pete had taken in 1987 that apparently everyone present had heard multiple times, and that was no less enjoyable for that. Courtney helped clear the tables without being asked, which was new, or at least new in my observation of her, and I filed it without comment. At 4 o'clock, as the light was beginning to go amber, and people were starting to talk about drives home, I was sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the garden, the same wall I had leaned against in July with my Meridian phone in my hand, when my personal phone buzzed, not a call. A calendar notification, September 12, board meeting, block afternoon. I looked at it. I looked at the garden. The roses, still going in early September, a little past their peak, but still there, still doing what they did. I cleared the notification. I put the phone in my pocket. Brandon came to sit on the wall beside me. Not close. A reasonable distance. He had his beer, almost finished, and he was looking at the same garden I was looking at. We sat there for a few minutes without saying anything. Then he said, "When you were 12, you got into the accelerated math program at school. The one that was only 4. I think it was the top 8 students in the district." I looked at him. "Mom and Dad took me to dinner to celebrate," he said. "Because I'd made the soccer team that same week." He paused. "I don't know if I ever," he stopped, started again. "I don't think anyone acknowledged that you got into that program." I looked at the roses. "No," I said. "They didn't." He nodded slowly. He finished his beer. He turned the bottle in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, "for that. And for other things I probably don't remember as clearly as you do." The garden was very still. A bee moved through the roses, the same unhurried way bees move through roses in September, with the particular industry of something that knows the season is almost over. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he repeated. We sat there until the light went full amber and then began to soften toward the early dark of a September evening. Two people sitting on a stone wall in a garden in Connecticut, not saying anything, which was the most honest conversation we had managed in 32 years. The Meridian board meeting was held on a Thursday. Not the 12th. The board had pushed by 3 days to accommodate a scheduling conflict with 2 of the outside directors, which was the kind of thing that happened and that I had learned over 6 years of working with boards not to read anything into. James called me the Monday before to confirm the new date and to tell me, in the measured way he told me things he considered significant, that he had prepared remarks. "Should I prepare remarks?" I said. "No," he said. "Just come." I came. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the 35th floor, with windows on 2 sides that on a clear day gave you a view north to the George Washington Bridge and east toward Queens. The city spread out below in the particular, vertiginous way that made it look both enormous and manageable depending on your mood. I had been in this room dozens of times. I knew where the light fell in the morning, and which chairs had a slight wobble, and that the coffee urn on the credenza ran slightly hot. I arrived at 1:50 for a 2 o'clock meeting. James was already there. He was standing at the north window with a coffee cup, looking at the bridge. And when I came in, he turned and looked at me, with the expression of a man who had been waiting, not impatiently, but with the focused readiness of someone who's decided what he wants to say and is prepared to say it. Avery, James, he gestured to the table. We sat. The other board members filed in over the next 8 minutes, 6 of them, plus the 2 outside directors who had caused the rescheduling, both of them joining by video on the screen at the far end of the table. By 2:05, the room was full, and James called the meeting to order. The first 40 minutes were procedural. Quarterly numbers, portfolio updates, the Collins and Mercer integration report, which Franklin presented in 10 minutes with the efficient, data-forward style he had developed over 25 years of presenting to people who did not want their time wasted. The integration was tracking. The anchor clients were retained. The projected 12-month return was ahead of initial modeling by a margin that made 2 of the board members write something down. Franklin sat. James looked at his notes, then he looked up. I want to talk about the future of this firm, he said. The room had a particular quality of attention. Not the polite, performative attention of people waiting for a meeting to end, but the focused, slightly forward-leaning attention of people who understood that what was being said had weight. I've been running Meridian for 22 years, James said. We started with 140 million under management and a staff of 11. We are now at 2.4 billion and 260 people across 3 offices. He paused. That growth is the result of good decisions, good timing, and one very specific hire I made 6 years ago. He looked at me. I looked back at him. Avery Collins joined Meridian at 26 as a senior associate. I want to be direct about something. I did not hire her because of her resume, which was impressive but not exceptional by the standards of candidates we see at that level. I hired her because, in the interview, she identified 3 structural inefficiencies in our mid-cap portfolio that my team had missed, and when I asked her how long it had taken her to find them, she said 40 minutes. He set down his notes. I have been in this business for 30 years. I have never had a 40-minute answer to a problem my team had been sitting on for a quarter. One of the outside directors, a woman named Barbara Choi, who ran a private equity fund in Chicago and who I had met twice at conferences and respected enormously, was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. In 6 years, James continued, Avery has taken our AUM from 1.8 to 2.4 billion. She has led or co-led 11 acquisitions, 7 portfolio restructurings, and the expansion into our London office. She has turned down 3 external offers that I know about, and possibly more that I don't. He paused. The board has asked me, at successive meetings over the past 2 years, about succession planning. I have been deliberately vague in those conversations because I wanted to be certain before I said anything that could not be unsaid. The room was very still. I'm certain, James said. He looked at the board. He looked at Barbara Choi. He looked at each of the outside directors on the screen. Then he looked at me. I am recommending to this board that Avery Collins be named President and CEO designate of Meridian Capital Group. Effective the 1st of January, with a full transition to CEO no later than 18 months. From that date, he paused. I will remain as executive chairman through the transition and available in an advisory capacity thereafter. The room held its breath for approximately 3 seconds. Then Barbara Choi said, I'll second that recommendation. The vote was 7-0. The 2 outside directors on the screen voted simultaneously, their faces small and clear in the video window, both of them nodding with the brisk, unambiguous certainty of people who had made up their minds before they walked in. James reached across the table and shook my hand. His grip was firm and warm and lasted exactly as long as it needed to. He held my gaze while he shook it, and I could see, under the professional composure, the particular satisfaction of a man who has spent 30 years building something and has found, late enough to matter, the person he trusts to carry it forward. Congratulations, Avery, he said. Thank you, James. The room exhaled. People moved. Barbara Choi came around the table to shake my hand and said something I remembered afterward as warm and specific, though in the moment it reached me from a slight distance. The way things do when your mind is processing something too large for the ordinary channels. Franklin was the last to reach me. He shook my hand, without theatrical flourish, the way Franklin did everything, directly, without excess. Clean exit, he said, which was what he had said about the Hartford Courant piece, and I understood that he meant something broader. Clean exit, I said. The board dispersed. James and I sat alone in the boardroom for a few minutes as the room emptied, both of us with coffee, neither of us saying anything immediately, which was one of the things I valued most about him. "How do you feel?" he said finally. I looked at the north window, the George Washington Bridge, small and exact at the edge of the visible world, the Hudson silver below it in the afternoon light. "Like I have a lot of work to do," I said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arrived without preparation. "Good. That means you're ready." I left the building at 4:30. I walked south on 6th Avenue instead of taking a car, which I did occasionally when I needed the city around me rather than above me, when I needed the scale of it at street level rather than from the 34th floor. The afternoon was warm and clear in the specific way of a New York September. The air carrying the first actual suggestion of fall, a coolness underneath the warmth that hadn't been there a week ago. People moved around me on the sidewalk with the self-contained, focused energy of a city that does not stop for anything, including you, which was something I had always found clarifying rather than lonely. My personal phone rang. I looked at the screen. My mother. I answered it. "Mom, Avery." A pause. "How are you?" "I was just thinking about you." "I'm good," I said. "I'm walking." "I just came out of a meeting." "A work meeting?" "Yes." Did it go well?" I walked past a flower stand, carnations and sunflowers in buckets at the sidewalk's edge, brilliant in the afternoon light. I looked at them as I passed. "It went very well," I said, a pause. "I'm glad." Her voice was different from the Thursday phone call in July. Still careful, still my mother, but with something loosened in it that I did not have a word for. "I wanted to call because," she stopped. "I want to do better, Avery. I know I've said things that—" Another stop. "I've been thinking about what you said. About being tired, Mom. I'm not trying to make it about me. Mom," I said again more gently. "It's okay, we'll talk when I come home." A pause. "You'll come home?" "For Thanksgiving," I said. "If that works." The silence was different this time. Softer. "That works," she said. "That absolutely works." We talked for another few minutes. Small things, the garden, my father's new obsession with a documentary series about national parks, Aunt Lorraine's pie, which had apparently won something at a local fair. Normal things. The ordinary contents of a family's life, offered and received, without the weight of everything that had been sitting underneath them for 30 years. When we hung up, I stood on 6th Avenue for a moment with the phone in my hand and the city moving around me. Then, at the exact moment I put the phone in my pocket, I heard it, a car horn, long, flat, insistent. I looked up. A black SUV had stopped at the curb 6 feet from where I was standing. Not the Meridian car service, a different vehicle, slightly newer, with Connecticut plates, and sitting in the back seat with the window down and an expression on his face that landed somewhere between sheepish and determined, was my brother Brandon. He leaned forward. "I was in the city," he said, "meeting with Kenji about the integration. Franklin's assistant told me you'd just left the building." I looked at him. I thought I'd. He paused. "I thought maybe we could get dinner." I stood on the sidewalk in the September afternoon light with the city moving around me and my brother's face in the window of a Connecticut SUV and the boardroom still fresh in my mind. James's hand, Barbara Choi's nod, the 7-0 vote, the bridge in the north window. I thought about the stone wall in September, the roses, the bee, the 12-year-old math program nobody acknowledged. I thought about the Honda, the cart on the lawn, the salmon going cold. I looked at Brandon. "I know a place," I said. "It's a 10-minute walk." He got out of the car. We walked south on 6th Avenue in the September light, my brother beside me for the first time in 32 years without the machinery of the family around us. No tent, no linen, no 43 people watching, no version of events to perform and no audience to perform just the city. Just the two of us. And for the first time since I could remember, that was enough. 18 months later, I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning. Not acquisition papers this time, not an authorization form or a closing document or anything with a witness line and a notary seal. Just the internal transfer documents that completed the CEO transition. 2 pages, my signature on each, James's counter-signature on the second. Priya had them ready on my desk when I arrived at 7:15. Same as always, next to an Americano I hadn't asked for. Same as always, James came in at 8. He sat across from me in my office, his office, technically, for another 4 hours, and we drank our coffees and talked about the Chicago portfolio and a mid-cap opportunity in the Southeast that Franklin had flagged the previous week and the London team's Q4 numbers, which were strong. Ordinary things. The ordinary contents of a working morning. At noon he stood up, he buttoned his jacket. He looked around the office with the expression of a man taking inventory of something he is ready to set down. "It's yours," he said. "Thank you, James." He shook my hand for the second time in 18 months, with the same firm, warm grip and the same held gaze. Then he picked up his coat and walked out, and I listened to his footsteps down the hall and the elevator arriving and the doors closing. And then I sat in my office, and looked at the city. The view from the 35th floor on a clear January morning is something I have never stopped finding extraordinary. The city below, hard-edged and bright in winter light, the river to the west catching the sun, the bridge at the far edge of what you can see, small and precise and constant. I had looked at this view from this chair thousands of times as COO. It looked different now, though I would have struggled to say exactly how. Not larger, not more impressive, just mine. In the specific earned way that things are yours when you have built them rather than been given them, Priya knocked once and opened the door. "Beth wants to know about the announcement timing," she said. 9 a.m. tomorrow, I said. "Internal first, then external by noon," she made a note. Franklin's asking about the Southeast file. "Tell him 2 p.m. The London office called about the Q1 framework. Conference call Thursday. All 3 offices," she wrote. She looked up. She held my gaze for a moment with the particular, composed certainty of someone who had known this was coming long before it was announced, and had already made her own plans accordingly. "Congratulations, Ms. Collins," she said. "Thank you, Priya." I paused. "I'm promoting you to Chief of Staff effective today. HR will have the paperwork this afternoon." She didn't look surprised. She never looked surprised. "I'll clear my calendar for the transition brief," she said. "Good. And Priya." She paused at the door. "Start thinking about your own succession plan," I said. "For your current role. I want your recommendation in 2 weeks." She smiled. A real one, the kind she reserved for things that mattered. "Already have someone in mind," she said. She closed the door. I turned back to the window. The announcement went out the following morning at 9 a.m. to the full Meridian staff, 263 people across New York, Chicago, and London. Beth's team had drafted it cleanly, and I had read it twice and changed 4 words. At noon it went external, a press release, a post on the firm's channels, brief and factual and forward-looking in the specific register of these things. By 1 p.m. I had 47 congratulatory emails. Brandon's came at 1:17. It was short, 2 sentences. "Congratulations, Avery. I always knew you'd end up running something important." I read it twice. I thought about all the things those 2 sentences contained and did not contain, all the history compressed into 12 words, and the particular courage it took to compress it that way and send it anyway. I wrote back 3 words. "Thank you, Brandon." Then I closed my email and went back to work. The Thanksgiving before the transition, I had driven up to Greenwich in the Honda. I thought about trading it in that fall. I could have, easily, had been able to for years. But I kept it. I liked the Honda. I liked what it meant to arrive in it. I liked the particular, uncomplicated honesty of driving a used car to your parents' house because it was a good car and you didn't need to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. My mother met me at the door. She had made the things she always made: the green bean casserole, the cranberry sauce from scratch, the rolls that took 3 days and that she started on Monday without telling anyone, as if the effort was private. The house smelled the way it had always smelled in November: wood smoke and butter, and the particular warmth of a house that has been occupied for 30 years by the same 2 people and has absorbed them into its walls. Brandon and Courtney were already there. He was in the kitchen helping my father with the turkey, in the way men who don't cook help with turkeys, standing nearby, offering opinions, occasionally being handed something to carry. Courtney was at the counter assembling a pie with the focused competence of someone who had decided to be good at this and had become good at it. She looked up when I came in. "Avery," she said, "I texted you my grandmother's potato salad recipe in September. Did you get it?" "I did," I said. "I made it twice." She seemed genuinely pleased. "How did it come out?" "First time, not enough salt. Second time, right." She laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind I had not heard from Courtney in 11 years of knowing her. "That's exactly what happens the first time. You have to salt the potatoes while they're still warm. I figured that out on the second try. That's the only way to figure it out, she said. I set down my wine and took off my coat and went to find Aunt Lorraine, who was in the living room with Pete watching football, and who embraced me before I had fully come through the doorway and held on with the particular, uncomplicated warmth of someone who had decided that love was a practice and not a verdict. Dinner was loud and long and slightly chaotic, in the specific way of a family dinner when everyone is trying, which produces its own kind of noise. The noise of people making an effort, which sounds different from the noise of people performing one. My father told 3 stories, 2 of which I had heard before and one of which I hadn't, and the new one was about a summer he'd spent on a fishing boat at 19 that I had never known about. And I listened to it with the surprised attention of someone discovering that a person they thought they knew completely has depths they hadn't looked for. After dinner, my mother and I did the dishes. This was not planned. It simply happened. The table cleared, the kitchen busy, and the 2 of us ending up at the sink together, the way you end up at a sink together in a family kitchen after a large meal, the ordinary choreography of it happening without decision. We washed and dried in silence for a few minutes. The window above the sink looked out on the back garden, dark now in November, the roses cut back for winter, the stone wall just visible in the light from the kitchen. I looked up Meridian, my mother said. I looked at her. Online, she said. After we talked in August. She paused. She was washing a serving bowl with the methodical attention of someone who needed something to do with her hands. I read about what you'd done. The acquisitions, the growth, the things they wrote about you in. There was a piece in something called Institutional Investor. I know the piece, I said. They called you. She stopped. She handed me the bowl to dry. They called you one of the most consequential investors of her generation. She said it carefully. The way you say something you have practiced. I didn't know, she said. I want you to know that I didn't know, and I'm sorry that I didn't know, and I'm more sorry that you felt you couldn't tell me. The kitchen was warm around us. Through the window the garden was dark and still. I know, Mom, I said. I keep thinking about that math program, she said. When you were 12, I looked at her. Brandon told me, she said. In September, he called and told me. Her voice was careful. Not performing, just careful. I don't remember why we didn't. She stopped. We should have taken you to dinner. We should have made it a celebration. I don't have a good reason why we didn't. I dried the bowl. I set it on the counter. I thought about the 12-year-old who had come home with that news and waited and waited and understood something that night without having words for it yet. It was a long time ago, I said. It was, she said, but you carried it. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, the way you look at people when you stop preparing for them and just see them. She was 62 now. She had my grandmother's hands, I noticed, wide-palmed and capable, currently submerged in soapy water. She looked tired in the way of someone who had been doing a lot of thinking in a short amount of time. I forgive you, I said. She looked up, not because everything was fine, I said, but because I'm done carrying it, and because you're trying now, and trying counts. I paused. It counts with me. She held my gaze for a moment, then she went back to the dishes and I went back to drying, and we stood at the sink together in the warm kitchen, while the garden sat dark and still outside the window. And my father laughed at something in the other room, and Brandon said something I couldn't hear, and Courtney's voice rose in response, and Aunt Lorraine said something that made Pete laugh, the ordinary sounds of a family on a Thursday evening in November. I dried the last dish. I put it away. I hung the towel on the handle of the oven door. My mother said, "Next year we'll come to you." I looked at her. For Thanksgiving, she said, "If you want. We could come to New York. You could show us where you work. Your apartment," she paused. If you want, I thought about my apartment with its west-facing windows and its kitchen I actually cooked in. I thought about the view from the 35th floor and the bridge at the edge of what you could see, small and constant in the north window. I'd like that, I said, a year after that Thanksgiving, on a clear morning in January, with the city bright and hard-edged below me, and the papers signed and James's footsteps fading down the hallway, I stood at my office window and looked at the bridge. I thought about a girl who got into an accelerated math program at 12 and came home to silence, who left Yale at 20 and came home to disappointment, who sat at a reunion table at 32 and listened to her mother say, "We just wish things had gone a little differently for you," and felt underneath the tiredness something that had not yet found its full shape. I thought about what that girl had built in the silence. In the space the family didn't look. In the specific, accumulated discipline of someone who had decided that results were the only argument worth making and had spent 10 years making it. I looked at the bridge. I thought, I am 32 years old. Except I wasn't anymore. I was 33, and I was the CEO of a firm that managed $2.4 billion, and my name was on a press release that would go out in 4 hours. And my brother had sent me 2 sentences that took 11 years of distance to write, and my mother had stood at a sink in November and said, "We could come to you," like an offering, which was what it was. I turned from the window. I sat down at my desk. I opened the Southeast file Franklin had flagged. I got back to work. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be believed in by the people who were supposed to believe in them first. I understand that wait. I lived it for 32 years. What I learned, not easily, not quickly, not without cost, is that the most dangerous thing you can do is make someone else's recognition the condition of your own becoming. The family that called me a failure did not make me one. They also did not make me a success. I did that. In the silence they left, in the space they didn't look, in the years they spent comparing me to a version of achievement I never wanted. If you are the one in your family they don't celebrate, the one who took the unconventional road, the one they worry about, the one they've written the cautionary tale for, I want you to hear this. The road they can't see is still a road. Keep walking it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? I want to hear your story. And if this one meant something to you, like and subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is about the people who refuse to stay small.